Let's talk about an urban legend that's become massively popular recently, the Backrooms. It's still just catching fire, really. This whole thing is only getting started. At this point, I'd guess almost everyone's heard the phrase parallel universe, but I doubt anyone's actually seen what one looks like. So let me show you. This, supposedly, is what's inside a parallel universe. And why do I say that? Because someone actually went there and took this photo. Wait, you can go to a parallel universe and still manage to snap a picture? Apparently so. Take a close look. There's just something deeply unsettling about this image. You genuinely can't place what kind of location this is even supposed to be. And this place is exactly what we're talking about today, the Backrooms. Back in January 2022, a YouTube channel called Kane Pixels posted a video titled The Backrooms, Found Footage. It's considered the very first, most original piece of footage depicting this particular parallel universe. The video runs about 9 minutes, and by now it's racked up somewhere north of 80 million views. In it, a group of young people appear to be shooting what looks like a horror film. Someone off to the side, presumably the director, is holding up a clapperboard that reads July 4th, 1991. That's roughly 35 years ago now. So what happens next? The director tells the cameraman to step back for a wider shot. He keeps backing up, and then the screen suddenly goes black, like he's fallen to the ground. When the picture comes back, the camera is somehow inside a yellow room, the same room we just saw in that photo. The ceiling is lined with row after row of fluorescent light tubes buzzing with this faint electrical hum. The floor is carpeted and apparently it smells faintly of mildew. The cameraman, still holding the camera, starts shouting, "Is anybody there?" and goes looking for a way out. The place is lit, but there are still plenty of dark corners everywhere. As he walks, he suddenly hears something behind him. He spins around, and there's something there, following him, but hiding. Every time he turns to look, it ducks out of sight. As we follow along with his camera, we start to notice that the walls and pillars are arranged completely differently from one area to the next. No two sections have the same layout. And sometimes, between two walls, there's this narrow little gap, and if you peer through it, all you see is an endless series of overlapping walls stretching back behind it. That video first went up back in early 2022, so it's been about 4 years now. Since then, the channel has gone on to post a whole series of similar clips, some barely a minute long, others running past 10 minutes. String them all together, and you actually get a coherent story. Supposedly, sometime between the 1970s and 80s, the world's top scientists identified a genuinely serious problem. The global population was growing at an explosive rate. And honestly, that's still true today. Right now, the world's population sits at around 8.3 billion people. And at the current pace, we're on track to approach something close to 10 billion by 2050. Population growth like that threatens to cause two very serious problems. The first is environmental damage. More people means more living spaces needed, which eats into natural environments. And it also means more industrial production, which brings more pollution and ecological strain. The second problem population growth could cause is resource depletion. Coal and other non-renewable resources are, after all, finite. Think about how many countries already deal with regular power outages today. Now imagine the population growing another 50%, pushing past 10 billion. Water and power shortages could become an everyday reality. Environmental damage, in the long run, could degrade the conditions humanity needs to survive, and resource depletion could very plausibly trigger a world war. To head off exactly that kind of disaster, roughly 50 years ago, a company called Async, at the time one of the most advanced technology firms in the world, proposed a solution. The idea was to open up an entirely new space in another dimension for humanity to expand into and relocate part of the population there to live. Of course, we're facing the same population pressures today, which is part of why Elon Musk's SpaceX is pursuing its own Mars colonization plans. But what Async proposed wasn't really a move to another planet kind of plan. It was called the Parallel Universe Reserve Project.
Put simply, instead of traveling somewhere impossibly far away, the idea was to expand a universe that overlaps with our own, just existing on a different plane, so you wouldn't need to go anywhere at all.
At the time, this project was designated KV-31. That KV-31 project is exactly what we now call the Backrooms. Did a project like this genuinely exist? Based on the footage that surfaced, it certainly seems like it did. Once the project got underway, things reportedly proceeded smoothly, and on October 5th, 1982, they ran their first spatial distortion experiment. How exactly do you open up a parallel universe? The idea was to use a powerful field to tear a rift open in space itself and then expand outward from that rift. The technology behind it was called low-range magnetic field distortion. Unfortunately, the first two experiments both ended in failure. After those setbacks, Async kept refining every detail and upgrading their equipment, and with significant backing from the US government, on July 2nd, 1989, 6 years after that first experiment, they ran their third attempt, and for the very first time, they managed to open a doorway into this parallel dimension. Just like in the movies. Exactly. It opened for a split second and immediately slammed shut again. You could barely tell it had opened at all. Just a flash of light. Nothing else visible on the other side. Riding that one success, Async pushed their experiments forward, running a fourth and fifth attempt. And finally, during their sixth experiment on October 17th, 1989, they succeeded in permanently opening a doorway into this parallel space. What lay behind that door looked like this. Behind that doorway was a region Async had built out inside the parallel universe, a space spanning roughly 1.5 billion square kilometers, and this entire space had already been designed by them in advance. The instant it opened, it was already fully formed. The whole thing snapped into existence all at once, made up entirely of rooms, so people could actually live inside it. In total, the area is roughly equivalent to 3 times the surface area of Earth. No doors, no windows anywhere, just endless partitioned little rooms like a maze of cubicles. And this is the exact place the cameraman from that opening video fell into. Why did he fall in? We'll get to that in a moment. After the Backrooms was created, Async's research team was initially thrilled. They felt they'd finally solved the population crisis. But they gradually started noticing some serious problems. The first came on the very day the Backrooms opened, October 17th, 1989 at 5:04 in the afternoon, when Florida was hit by a magnitude 6.9 earthquake. That earthquake genuinely happened in the story's own timeline, leveling a huge number of buildings and killing more than 270 people, with thousands more injured. From that point on, Async discovered that ordinary civilians kept randomly slipping into the Backrooms, just like that cameraman at the very beginning. Exactly who ended up falling in and why? The company had absolutely no idea. And once someone fell in, getting back out again was extremely difficult. That's because the space inside is simply massive, and the only doorway Async actually knew about was the one they themselves had opened. There was no other known exit. If you ended up thousands of kilometers away from that door, how would you possibly find your way back? There was only ever the one door, so how were people even falling in from so far away in the first place? Right? And at first, Async genuinely had no idea any of this was happening. It was only later that they realized there were people trapped inside it all, and more kept falling in over time. The interior, as we've seen, is like an endless maze. There's no real sense of direction, which makes finding anyone inside it extremely difficult. Sometimes you'll see a flash of white on a wall, but when you actually get close, it just turns out to be another room, never a real exit. Because people kept slipping into the Backrooms, missing persons numbers in the real world kept climbing. According to the U.S. National Crime Center's own statistics, missing persons cases in the United States really did spike sharply between 1990 and 1995. That's presented as genuine data within the story. Async's experimental base was located in the United States, and other countries barely knew anything about the project at all. So where did all this footage from the people who never made it out actually come from?
Well, some people did eventually manage to find an exit. Most of what gets uploaded is footage people actually carry back out with them, but plenty of people fell in and left no footage behind at all, meaning a lot of that era's missing persons cases were very likely people who'd fallen into the backrooms. Otherwise, why else would missing persons numbers have spiked so suddenly? Around this time, Async began to suspect that some kind of bug connected the real world and the backrooms directly, letting certain people slip through without ever passing through the actual doorway at all. So they quickly assembled an exploration team and sent it into the backrooms to start investigating. Since the only way the team itself could physically
Get in was through that one official doorway. They had no real idea how these unofficial entry points even worked. Going in, they brought a very long rope with them, playing out behind them as they went. Interestingly, the space wasn't actually supposed to look like this at all originally. The design had been for something perfectly ordinary. Rows of individual detached houses, one after another, just like any normal neighborhood. But once the space actually formed, it turned out to be this completely flat, open expanse with no real compartments to speak of. Not remotely what anyone had intended. Even Async hadn't expected it to turn out this way. After opening that doorway into the parallel space, Async established a set of standard protocols for exploring the backrooms, including a rule that nobody was ever allowed to go in alone, and that once inside, teams had to move in groups of at least 3. Following those guidelines, Async's research staff put together an exploration team. During one of their expeditions, they found a person's remains, mummified, sitting upright on the ground. They brought the body back to the company, and their biomedical science team performed an autopsy. The person had, in fact, died. The cause of death was determined to be malnutrition. But strangely, the internal organs hadn't actually died at all. These still living organs were wrapped in some kind of mysterious fungus, and not only had they failed to decay, they were still functioning, making the whole body feel almost zombie-like. They eventually learned that the Backrooms is home to a number of genuinely terrifying creatures. Whether these things spawned automatically when the Backrooms itself came into being, or originally came from Earth, isn't entirely clear. Nothing quite like them exists back on Earth, so it's possible they're Earth organisms that mutated after ending up in there. Some of what's inside may not even belong to our species at all. These horrifying creatures apparently attack people who've fallen into the Backrooms and implant this fungus onto their bodies, essentially using humans as a nutrient source to grow themselves, which is exactly why victims consistently show signs of malnutrition. The fungus is quite literally absorbing their nutrients. And once it's absorbed enough, the fungus can grow to an enormous size, move remarkably fast, and even go hunting for other survivors, capturing them, implanting more of itself, and growing yet another one. It's a fungal organism, by the way, not a plant. It just looks a bit like one at first glance. And that, as it turns out, was the very thing that had been following the cameraman right from the start of the footage. You might now suspect that creature was exactly this, a parasite that once it takes hold, absorbs its host's human DNA, which actually shapes its appearance. And the more people fall into the Backrooms, the more of these things there are. By now, well over 30 years have passed since the Backrooms first opened, so there are likely a great many of these creatures inside at this point. Later surveillance footage even suggested this thing might be able to mimic human speech to lure people in. So if you fall into the Backrooms and hear what sounds like someone talking nearby, but nobody's actually there, it might just be this creature imitating a human voice to draw you toward it before absorbing you. I suppose it's not really evil so much as just how it survives. It does hunt, yes, but of course this creature is far from the only monster in the Backrooms. None of these creatures exist anywhere in our own world. By now, people have put together a rough classification system for them, sorting each one by threat level, roughly 8 tiers in total, from level 0 up to level 7. Level 0 is completely harmless. Level 1 shows no active aggression, though it might have some natural defenses, a bit like a hedgehog's spines. Leave it alone and it won't hurt you. Level 2 also shows no active aggression, but it will fight back if provoked. Level 3 has some active aggression, but it's fairly weak.
A single person can handle it alone. Level 4 is actively aggressive and roughly as strong as a human. Level 5 is actively aggressive and considerably stronger than a human. From level 6 on up, if you actually run into one, you're essentially finished. Let me walk through a few particularly notable ones, 3 creatures worth remembering. The first is entity number 3, known as the Smiler. It's a level 4 threat, actively aggressive, roughly as strong as a human. And yes, it eats people, and it will actively hunt you down. Fortunately, it does have a weakness. It's strangely drawn to light. So if you ever run into a Smiler, throw your flashlight or anything else that glows off to the side. It'll be briefly distracted and chase after the light instead, giving you a chance to get away. The catch is, in the Backrooms, something like a flashlight is an incredibly precious resource, so you can't just go throwing it away carelessly. You want to think of some other way to distract it if you can.
You might wonder whether you can actually pick up and use items like this while exploring the Backrooms. It's not exactly a video game, but as you make your way through, you really do come across all kinds of items that the space itself seems to generate on its own. You collect these tools as you go, and eventually use them to help you find your way out. It's all part of continuing to push forward and explore in search of the right path.
Then there's another famous one. Entity number 8, the Hound. It's another level 4 creature, same tier as the Smiler. Its saliva carries a kind of virus. If it bites you, within roughly 30 minutes you start turning zombie-like, gradually transforming into a hound yourself, eventually crawling around on all fours. This is part of why certain stretches of the Backrooms feel almost like a hunting ground. This is exactly the kind of hard-won knowledge that cost earlier explorers their lives, so it's worth paying close attention to. To deal with a hound, use its own habits against it. It tends to let out a low, threatening growl right before attacking. The moment you hear that sound, get out of the way. And if you do end up face-to-face with one, don't panic. Stare it down with wide eyes to startle it, and it'll back off for a moment, giving you the chance to run.
There's also another well-known creature, Entity 62, known as the Spider Thing. It's a level 5 threat, considerably stronger than a human. If it catches you, you're finished. They tend to drop suddenly from the ceiling and move incredibly fast, much faster than any person can run. Their one weakness is that they're slow to turn, so if you're being chased, keep making sharp turns and you'll eventually shake it off. On top of that, its memory is famously terrible. Lose it around a few corners and it'll actually forget it was ever chasing you in the first place, and you'll be safe.
As for that fungal creature we described earlier, which threat category it actually falls under still isn't known. It remains something of a mystery. Beyond the creatures, there are also all kinds of other things you might come across in the Backrooms, items worth picking up and holding on to. For instance, one of the best things you could possibly find is a food item known as Almond Water. One sip is enough to sustain you for an entire day. It's incredibly valuable for exactly that reason, and everyone who's ever tried it apparently says it's the most delicious thing they've had in their entire life. But because it's such a limited resource, you really shouldn't let anyone know if you found some, because even your own companions might turn on you to take it for themselves. There's also a very distinctive mirror somewhere inside the Backrooms. On the surface, it looks like an entirely ordinary mirror, but it has one strange property. Stare into it long enough, and you'll start seeing glimpses of the real world reflected back at you. That's exactly what makes it so dangerous. A lot of people, after seeing their old life reflected that vividly, end up having an intensely emotional reaction to it. This is a mirror you genuinely shouldn't look into. It's been known to strip people of the will to keep living.
Now, the second piece of footage? This one's dated February 29th, 1990. Async sent another expedition into the Backrooms. In any case, the company was never publicly traded. It was one of those secretive, powerful conglomerates. This time, nothing especially frightening appeared on camera at first. But at one point during the walk, someone thought they heard voices nearby. He followed the sound, only to find it led to a dead end. Nobody there at all. By the time he turned to head back and rejoin the rest of his 4-person team, the other 3, who'd been right there with him only a moment before, were simply gone.
he was suddenly alone. He started frantically searching for his teammates. The tricky part was, one of the three who'd vanished had been the one holding their guide rope. And now that rope was gone too, so he had no way of retracing his path back. Nobody knows what happened to the others. But while filming, he did capture what looked like it might be an exit.
When he went through that door, though, it just led to yet another room. Not every room in the Backrooms looks like that dim yellow scene either. There are all kinds of different rooms, and there are even areas that resemble the outdoors. At times, you might genuinely believe you'd finally made it back out. Except this particular world is stuck in permanent night, and there isn't a single other person in it.
According to the timestamps on the footage, comparing when the four of them had actually entered the Backrooms against how much time had passed in the real world, it became clear that time inside the Backrooms doesn't move the same way it does out here. Because of the dangerous creatures that might be lurking inside, Async set up an outpost right at the entrance to the Backrooms and installed a large number of cameras to keep watch over that room. As a result, they ended up capturing footage of some enormous creatures that clearly seemed to be deliberately avoiding human observation. That monitoring station itself was actually located inside the Backrooms. Then, on May 6th, 1990, they discovered a room whose entire floor was riddled with holes. While passing through, the person operating the camera accidentally fell through one of them and discovered that what lay beneath went on seemingly forever. Which tells us something important. The Backrooms isn't just one single space. It's made up of countless layers. At first, they identified just a handful of major layers, but they gradually discovered an enormous number of negative-numbered layers as well, along with a range of anomalous ones. So far, well over 100 layers have been documented, but nobody knows the true total. How large the Backrooms actually is remains completely unknown, and it contains every kind of environment imaginable. The yellow room we saw at the very start is what's known as the lobby. That's level 0. Level 1 is the habitable zone. Level 2 is pipe dreams. Level 3 is the electrical station. Level 4 is the abandoned office. Level 5 is the hotel. Level 6 is lights out. Level 7 is the lasophobia. And level 8 is the cave system.
Every layer has its own unique creatures and items, and some even follow their own distinct laws of physics.
And there's one more place inside the Backrooms that's especially terrifying. It's called the Void. It's a completely empty space, pitch black, containing nothing whatsoever. Fall into the Void and you'll drift through endless darkness, essentially forever. You won't even die in there. You'll simply keep drifting, like falling into literal infinity.
Because the Backrooms hold so many unknown risks, and because the creatures living inside it might very possibly find their way back into our own world, Async made a decision. If that ever happened, the consequences really would be unthinkable. So they sealed off the passage between their outpost and the Backrooms. But as for the people who were still trapped inside, there really wasn't much more to be done. The underlying bug behind all of this was never actually fixed. Async simply sealed off the one known entry point they controlled. As it turned out, about a year after that door was sealed shut, on July 4th, 1991, is exactly when the footage we opened with today was recorded. So, as far as the real world is concerned, the Backrooms is something you could stumble into completely by accident, without any warning at all. Which is exactly why it's worth being careful. That covers the basics. So, under what circumstances might someone actually fall in? As it turns out, whenever a person enters what's called a void state, they become highly likely to slip into the Backrooms. What exactly is a void state? Something like being near death, extremely weak, or having your mind go completely blank from some sudden shock.
In that particular state, a person becomes very likely to fall straight through. This might happen, say, after a bad fall from illness or a hard knock to the head. And that same void state, apparently, is also what lets people move between different layers once they're already inside the backrooms. That's essentially the mechanism, as far as anyone currently understands it. Looking at the very existence of the backrooms itself, what we call the real world might actually just be one relatively safe layer within the backrooms that we happen to live on, which is precisely why it's possible for us to fall into the rest of it, into any of its other layers in the first place. Now, to finish up, let me tell you where this whole idea actually came from. Back on May 12th, 2019, an anonymous user on 4chan started a thread asking people to upload unsettling images. Not images that are disturbing in some obvious visual way, but the kind that get more unsettling the longer you stare at them. Images that quietly creep under your skin the more you think about them.
The very first image posted in response was exactly that. It clearly looked like it had been taken somewhere by someone, but nobody could say exactly where that place was. You could try to recreate that same photo yourself, and you simply wouldn't be able to. No doors, no windows, just this cramped, featureless little space. Naturally, other people started uploading similar images too. That same off, out-of-place feeling. Like this. Or like this. And speaking of which, you've probably already noticed what we've actually been doing today. This whole thing is a piece of internet folklore, an entire story built up around a single photograph, a whole universe grown out of one image.
Of course, this isn't the only project of its kind. There are plenty of others. This is just one example. Compared to something like the SCP Foundation, the biggest difference is that this one is still in its early stages. This particular image first surfaced back in 2019, so it's only been around 7 years or so at this point, whereas SCP has already been running for closer to 2 decades. So, in a way, everyone caught this whole genre right at the very beginning of its life. You can take that original image and build your own story around it, turn it into your own film. That's exactly what happened with the Async footage I showed you earlier. It was actually made by a 16-year-old filmmaker. A lot of well-known directors have spoken highly of his work, since he wove in nods to so many classic horror films throughout it. It really doesn't feel like something made by a beginner. The whole production is remarkably polished. And that room itself, of course, doesn't actually exist anywhere. It's entirely constructed. It's almost on the level of something like the Avengers in terms of craftsmanship. Genuinely, however you look at it, it just doesn't feel like the work of a 16-year-old. It feels like a full-scale production.
And the view count backs that up. It's enormous, which really shows how much this resonated with people. The series is still going today, and plenty of spin-offs have popped up on other channels as well. Basically, fan creations, people making their own branching storylines. Remember how we mentioned there are so many different layers? A lot of these creators pick a different layer and build their own story around it. You're free to come up with your own ideas and create something entirely new. And if you don't know where to start, that's fine too. The Backrooms wiki actually lays out exactly how to build your own content, with a whole set of established conventions to follow.
So, if you're interested, you can genuinely go create your own layer of the Backrooms and put together a video around it, post it now, and there's a real chance you'll catch this wave right as it's building, the same way SCP did all those years ago. So really, there's no need to get hung up on whether any of this is true or not. What matters is that you get to create your own world. Oh, honestly, this whole format is worth considering for yourself. Think about it, an entire universe grown out of one single photo. You could do the exact same thing. Take one image and build your own story around it. Making a video like this yourself could mean setting it in a wuxia world, or a Harry Potter-style magical world, or that whole nostalgic high school setting. Build a world exactly like this one, and invite everyone else in to explore it with you.
So personally, I'm genuinely looking forward to seeing where the rest of this backroom story goes.
Though, really, all I've done here is help pull you into this little world of mine. It's not that impressive, honestly. Not that impressive at all.